Hello, I am Suzanne Hilser-Wiles, President of GGNA, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest edition of our Thought Leadership Series. If you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A button at the top or bottom of your screen. We won't have time to respond to them today, but we will post answers on our website in the days ahead. I am joined today by David Unruh, who has served as Senior Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Drexel University for the last 7 years. During this period, the university has been engaged in the campaign for Drexel, which, with a goal of $750 million, is the largest campaign in the university's history. David came to this position after serving in senior leadership roles at Temple University, the University of Chicago, the University of Pennsylvania, and Carnegie Mellon. In addition to this very impressive list, David was also a Senior Vice President at GGNA, where he worked with a variety of clients and also helped develop a training program for major gifts officer. David has been my colleague and my client, so it is a particular treat to be with him here today. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's great to be here with you and nice to see you again. We've had a long history together. It's good to be together.
Yes, thank you. So David, will you start off by telling us about the advancement program at Drexel?
Sure. Well, Suzanne, you know it well, but we are a 125 person hybrid organization. Most of our fundraising capacity is school and college based. That's actually the model that was here when I arrived at Drexel, and we left it in that format largely to begin moving us into this campaign. We have a set of shared services at the center, like many organizations, so marketing, communications, annual fund, planned giving, donor relations, and stewardship, and of course our database and gift processing team centrally. I should add, of course, that the Academy of Natural Sciences, which became part of Drexel in 2011, remains a freestanding 501c3, but is a strong partner to Drexel, and the advancement team at the Academy functions largely like one of our school and college programs, but has a dotted line report to me as well, and is fully integrated into the overall advancement team.
So, David, one of the interesting things about working with Drexel, and particularly as you grow major gifts, is the breakdown of alumni and how large the university got at certain points in its history. Could you just give that context to people? Because it's both an opportunity and a challenge in fundraising for you.
You're right, Suzanne, and it's one of the things we've thought a lot about in this campaign, but Drexel is 130 years old roughly as an institution, but for most of that time, up until roughly 2000, it was largely a 3-college entity: business, engineering, what now is the Westfall College of Media Arts and Design, and then the arts and sciences programs were largely service units to the rest of the campus. So classes, the class sizes were much smaller, primarily a commuter institution. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, the university made a strategic decision to really grow and expand its academic programs. And then subsequently, when the Allegheny Hahnemann College of Medicine enterprise failed, Drexel took on the Hahnemann College of Medicine, the School of Public Health, and the College of Nursing and Health Professions, and dramatically expanded its healthcare clinic and educational programs. And really what we see now is that about 50% of our entire alumni population graduated in the last 20 years. So we have a very interesting circumstance, right, where you have these mostly newer, many times residential-based students, a whole cohort of students for whom Drexel was sort of a new introduction to their college career, those that came through the healthcare side. And then a host of alumni that we inherited, frankly, as well from those legacy institutions. So very interesting and quite frankly, sometimes very challenging dynamics to work through in building a Drexel culture of engagement.
Yeah.
But we've seen some really positive success there, and it's been a lot of fun to really expand our engagement with the alumni population.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch and to be part of those discussions with your team too. You've got these, it's not sort of the straight line trajectory that we see at some of the other institutions where you've worked. The history of Drexel has had some real pivots, and your team figuring out how to expand philanthropy based on that has been really interesting to see.
Yeah, it's had real implications for things like plan giving, for example, just as a quick aside. But you know, our plan giving operation is quite strong, but the number of sort of traditionally aged alumni that we would otherwise be looking at is much smaller than what our size would suggest because of that generational sort of bifurcation in our alumni population.
This is very much on our mind right now because David and I had a conversation last week about what's a percentage of alumni who should have a planned gift at Drexel. What's a great goal for that? And without considering that demographic, you might set some expectations that are not realistic based on just the size of your alumni pool, for instance. So, so David, can you tell us a little bit about the campaign for Drexel, the campaign you're currently in, where you are on that timeline, and how it's going?
Suzanne, I'm pleased to say that we've crested over the $703 million mark as of this morning towards our $750 million goal. So inching ever closer to the end goal. The campaign will conclude officially on June 30 of 2022. So we're about to enter our final year. You know, it's been a really, I think, successful in many ways, a lot of learnings in this campaign. I think it's important to set the context that we started this campaign. We went public in November of 2017. We started this campaign explicitly with a goal of getting ready for the next campaign. And I say that because this is the third campaign in Drexel's history. It will be the largest by almost double. And we were facing a point in time at the university where there was great need to really catalyze our fundraising capacity, and a president, and a board that wanted to move forward. But a lot of the infrastructure, if you will, didn't really exist at the institution. And by that, I mean that the kind of experience with a true comprehensive campaign, the understanding and experience of what a comprehensive advancement program really looked like needed to be built. And we structured this campaign to actually help us accomplish a lot of that, even underneath all of the important fundraising aspects of it. The other thing that I would characterize as perhaps slightly different is that because the university was in the midst of kind of the end of its strategic plan and hadn't yet begun a new strategic planning exercise, this campaign is not anchored fully into a new strategic plan for the university, and thus became kind of a collection of priorities based on school college needs, and then a handful of other kind of presidential initiatives, and really focused on people and program building, very little capital focus. So I think going forward, the importance of kind of anchoring ourselves to a strategic plan will be really beneficial now that we've scaled our operation and our kind of institutional maturity, if you will, to really drive that forward. One quick thing I would just add, though, that we have two transformative gifts at the early part of this campaign that really anchored us. So naming gifts to the School of Public Health from the Dornside family, and another naming gift to our School of Law from Tom Klein really set us off well and created a level of confidence, I think, in the institution, and also a level of aspiration that academic leaders could really point to. And as we've welcomed new deans into our orbit over the last several years, my colleagues will know this well. Every single dean at Drexel is new since I started 6.5 years ago. So we've gone through that welcoming process of every new academic leader. But all of them, I think, are much stronger fundraising deans, and all of them are inspired by the opportunity to work with advancement in ways that I don't think our structure allowed previously.
So, David, could you just expand on that a little? That's such an interesting thing to kind of marry those two pieces of information you just shared. There wasn't an overarching strategic plan, so a lot of it was about, those local goals and vision, and you had deans that were new coming on during the campaign.
Right.
How did your team work with them to help quickly set the kind of priorities that could be supported by gift opportunities?
Well, I would say it was an ongoing and repeated process in the sense that as a new dean was welcomed, we would quickly begin to engage them with them in their own strategic planning activity. We had a marketing and communications team that literally would make the rounds to every school and college and sit with the dean and the advancement leads in each of those programs and identify to the best that we could the known priorities in the college, and then work to articulate them into, relatively straightforward case for support documents that could be quickly shared. Now, like every institution, we benefit from the fact that we always need scholarships, we always need endowed chairs, we always need, support for student success. So all of those kind of bread and butter, things we could capitalize on pretty clearly. We opportunistically took advantage of some capital fundraising opportunities throughout the course of the campaign, but largely it was an effort, to move very quickly, as quickly as possible with every dean as they came on board to, get them in front of new donors and as quickly as possible kind of fold their emerging fundraising aspirations into the campaign. That we had the benefit of being able to do that because we weren't tethered to a strategic plan, but the disadvantage of that, of course, is that we were sort of always making it up as we go, right? And relying on the timeline of a dean to come in, get situated, develop a vision, and then be able to begin articulating that to stakeholders. That always kind of put us a little bit behind in terms of building a comprehensive vision with donors at the very highest level. Yeah. I don't want to take anything away from the extraordinary success of my colleagues and our academic partners, but going forward, linking our fundraising aspirations and organization more fully to a comprehensive strategic plan, I think will be beneficial in terms of raising the sights of our donors and really expanding our capacity to drive kind of big philanthropy around big multidisciplinary ideas that we just didn't have in this campaign.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of pressure perhaps off when you do have that senior academic leadership shift, which happens at every institution.
Exactly.
And one of the things that you said early that I want to make sure is super clear to people, because I think it's really interesting. You said, you were building this for the next campaign, even though this campaign was doubling the fundraising of any previous campaign. Right. And, working with you and your team, I think one of the things that's been so impressive is that you're not only focused on that $750 million, but that what you really mean by that is how do we build sustainable growth trajectory here. Right. And, so what, as you were thinking about and regularly reviewing, not just how do we get in those kind of big gifts, as you said early on, that drive this, but what do we want to be different at the end of the campaign for the program? So how have you kind of in the moment been able to keep the focus on that, even as there's pressure every year to, raise $80 million?
Well, I think because we set the expectation up front, and I set the same expectation with our team, as with the president and with the board of trustees, that this campaign really was, clearly about driving resources into the university on a higher level than we had before, and we've been successful in that. We needed to expand the pool of donors. We were much too reliant on a small group of high-level major donors to meet our goal every year. And frankly, we still are. But we've expanded the base, and the number of, the number of that small number is bigger, but it's still, right. It's still too small.
It's notably bigger than it was.
Right. But part of this, really was about managing expectations, which was, if we're not going to have a big major capital activities in the campaign, which is what most of our donors were used to giving to previously, and we're going to pivot and seek endowment gifts, that's going to have a different feel on the way the campaign kind of impacts the organization, right? What we didn't know, of course, what none of us knew, of course, was COVID, that was coming down the pike. But at Drexel, we also didn't know, for example, that our clinical partner at Hahnemann Hospital was going to be purchased by a private equity firm and then ultimately go into bankruptcy and disappear. We didn't know that we would then, be partnering with another nonprofit and buying St. Christopher's Hospital to ensure that we had pediatric rotations. We didn't know that in some cases, not one but two deans would be new during the life of the campaign. So. Yeah. So we've had to remain really nimble, but I think the fact that we started from the vantage point of this is about getting ready for the next has always been helpful, because we could then focus on things like, how do we dramatically expand our alumni engagement? Number one, what is the level of engagement we have? Number two, how do we measure it? And number three, how do we then dramatically expand it? And we've had great success in doing that. We've had great success in building out networks into our recent alumni population, who are our next generation, major donors. We've had success in expanding the board of trustees and bringing a whole new generation of board members on, and recalibrating the expectations of the board's giving themselves. And we've had, as I mentioned earlier, I think much more success in truly working with, in a partnership way, our academic partners, where we have now a set of deans who are excited to and eager and willing to work with us, who see themselves as fundraising deans and are taking a lot of the pressure off, the president and a small number of other leaders to be the primary principal gift donors. And that's beginning to really pay dividends for us. But it's been a building experience over the course of the last few years, for sure.
Well, and I think having that lens and continually reinforcing that with your team also allows you to focus on what is the important, but not always the urgent, right? A lot of these things, these are slow builds. Yeah. And if you don't have that end goal beyond the dollars in mind, it can be easy to let some of these things slip by the wayside. And then we see, you and I both have a lot of experience seeing these campaigns that are wildly successful. And then the couple of years after the campaign, the program looks pretty much like it did pre-campaign.
Right.
And then you end up with the same. In fact, we have a client right now that is struggling with this. How do we, if you don't do that, you end up with a campaign goal that's basically the same campaign goal as the time before.
Exactly. Suzanne, one of the things that we've done very intentionally is talk about the fact that we need to be a different organization at the end of the campaign than we were when we started, right? So part of our strategic planning activities internally to advancement have included, of course, how do we sustain our fundraising growth? How do we continue to build out our alumni engagement? How do we create a culture of philanthropy across campus? And what does that mean in terms of, the awareness of and the importance of philanthropy, and the role that philanthropy can and cannot play at institutions? And then the last goal that we've set and talk about, I think pretty regularly, is being a world-class advancement operation. And what does that actually mean, right? And it's going to mean different things for us than it might mean for another place, but it means that we are comprehensive. It means we're collaborative. It means that we are rowing in the same direction when we wake up every day and get in our boat to go to work.
Right.
Right. It means that we understand that each of us understands what our role is relative to the other and what the shared goals are, and that we all have accountability, for those goals. So, are we doing that perfectly every day? Of course not. There isn't an organization, I think, that does that. Are we doing it pretty well? I think so. I hope my colleagues would back that up. But fundamentally, when you ask, what are we doing to kind of change the culture and what this campaign has been about? This campaign has been about changing the way we work together and think about our role at the organization and how we are integral to the success of the university and how the success of the university is integral to our success as an advancement operation. And you can't have one without the other. And that I think has been one of the most important kind of cultural building blocks that I hope we can look back on and say we achieved at the end of this campaign that will have significant implications for how we move forward in the next year.
Yeah, that's great. So the university is averaging $75 to $80 million a year on average during the campaign period and fundraising. That's $15 to $20 million a year more than you averaged during the last campaign. So that's a significant lift. In addition to some of these culture things that you talked about, what's worked in building that effort? What's been successful for your team?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, so hope you'll forgive me.
It's
But
okay.
let me start with the board. One of the most important things that we did, and thankfully this was supported by and led by board leadership, was reset the expectations of what philanthropic leadership looked like at the board level.
And you did that at the beginning of the campaign.
We did at the beginning of the campaign. And I was fortunate to have a really strong partner, not only in the chairman of the board, but in the chair of the nominating governance committee, who almost independent of any encouragement from me, began to question the role, the level of board expectations. And annual board giving had been set at a certain level for many, many years and had not changed. And we talked a lot about what would it take to move it to the next level. What should the right expectations be, and what role could they take in beginning to change the way that board members exemplified their giving leadership. And almost instantaneously, we doubled the annual contribution from the board simply by asking people to give more and by stating the expectation of what they would give, right? So,
with largely the same group of people.
With largely the same group of people. But it comes back to that old adage that, GG&A, often preaches, which is, why did people give? Well, because they were asked, right? So, so we asked them to give more and explain the reasons why, and it immediately began to reset expectations. And then as we've onboarded new trustees, been very explicit about the expectation up front, and that has had a remarkable change. In fact, the board, in the last campaign, I think the board contributed about 65 million, and we're already at 110 million in this campaign. I'd like it to be closer to 150 by the time we conclude, but it's a good step forward.
Yeah.
So that was number one. Number two, I mentioned earlier, we've been very successful in expanding our reach into our alumni donor pool, and expanding our known set of major gift prospects. The number of new $10,000 donors year over year has remained very, very strong, and it continues to be, if not a record-breaking number each year, certainly approximating the high water mark during the campaign. And that's been really important because even though those gifts are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, to move the campaign forward, it's laying the groundwork for our next campaign. Yeah. We've also been able to engage a lot of non-alumni partners, and this is something that Drexel has a long history of doing, in part by virtue of its history with the co-op program, and many local CEOs were often part of the board. So there are, similar to the University of Chicago's history, there's an intersection in the community between Drexel and the CEO corporate leadership that works to our advantage, and we've been able to bring many non-alumni into the fold as well. We've expanded our parent philanthropy, and we've expanded our foundation grant activities, particularly supporting our research in the College of Medicine and healthcare areas. So those are some of the things I would point to that says we've been able to move the needle. We're still too reliant on a very small number of 7 or 8 figure gifts to kind of push us beyond that $80 million amount consistently. COVID didn't help, of course. The 2017 tax law didn't help either because it kind of cut out the bottom of the donor pyramid for us, like it did for many. But we've done a good job in building the middle of the pyramid, which is where we need to continue to pay a lot of attention.
So when you think about what you set out to do at Drexel when you were hired and brought in to kind of change this culture, what's been harder than you thought it might be?
I suppose the easy answer would be COVID, but everybody got that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Didn't plan for a pandemic.
Yeah.
Look, I think what's been harder, I'll talk about culture change is hard. I knew it would be hard. It's always hard. But I think the complicating factors of all the changes the university has gone through, the changes in academic leadership, although really important, require building new relationships every time there's somebody coming on board. The headwinds we faced with our clinical healthcare partners have certainly, impinged those because it puts budget pressure. Changing culture in the midst of budget pressures is even harder, I think, because you have so many competing demands, on your plate. So that's been more difficult than I probably expected kind of looking from the outside in. But now that we're in it, I can appreciate why it's been challenging, and also maybe appreciate more some of the steps it actually does take. It doesn't happen as quickly as I had hoped. That's number one. Number two, I would say that the readiness of our donor pool to make major commitments. And by that, I mean that we don't lack for wealth capacity in our alumni population. We lack for depth of relationship, and we haven't earned the right to ask for the gift yet. And that's, we're catching up for decades of, and similar to many institutions, you probably have a whole list of clients that are in a similar place to Drexel. And this is not a criticism of our coworkers previously or anybody else, just decisions the university made or the structure of the institution. So, as a commuter institution up until the late 90s, early 2000s, hard to have campus community. As a pretty pragmatic, kind of practical oriented institution, the traditions of alumni engagement and, didn't exist in the same way as they do at other places. So those are not excuses, but they are realities of our alumni population, and building the relationships, the emotional relationships that matter so much in philanthropy takes a long time. And that continues to take time, and is something that has been challenging. And then finally, I would just end by the fact that we're under-resourced, and I'm not sharing that out of context or out of line. But every benchmarking study that we do suggests that we are probably 25 to 30 FTEs less than what our aspirant peers are, and probably $8 to $10 million less in budget. So we're about at the max of what we can do on a year-over-year basis with our current headcount and operating budget, and that's okay. But we've got to either be more creative, work smarter, work faster, or have a change in the budget and resource allocation for us to, I think, really go to the next level going forward. So again, not an excuse, just a reality of where we are. And I think a lot of institutions are facing those same kind of budget constraints, Suzanne. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm complaining about this, just acknowledging that you reach a point where barring the one-time non-repeatable big gifts coming your way, you reach a point where I just think you kind of top out on your productivity, your ability to meet enough major donors and convert people and move to the next level at some point.
Well, and as the person who's provided a lot of those benchmarks, I can confirm that is true and not complaining. So the other thing that I think you find yourself in a position that I've had a lot of people on this call are, where the university tends to look at it as how many people you have, how many frontline fundraisers, what kind of budget compared to what you used to have, right? So it's been this enormous investment relative to history, and that is true. At the same time, the expectation is still much, much higher. And you've got an alumni base, as you point out, that is, just half of them are probably just coming into their kind of major gifts years. The other thing at Drexel, which I'm sure is true for many of our listeners, is that you have a lot of people who've created their own wealth. They don't come from these families that have maybe a history of philanthropy at a major gift level. And so you're having to do a little more work on some of these cultural things with your donor base as well. And it's hard to do that when you're already stretched pretty thin.
That's a really good point, Suzanne, that we have extraordinary alumni. And when I meet them and talk with them, to a person, they talk almost to a person, talk positively about their experience at Drexel, right? What is consistently true is that the trajectory of their life was changed pretty remarkably by coming to Drexel and their co-op experience in many cases. But you're right, there is not a strong embedded experience with philanthropy in our alumni population, and it's really exciting to work with individuals for whom they're making their first gift and begin to see the possibilities of what they can do. But you and I know, and everybody on this call knows, that getting past that sort of emotional, psychological idea of giving away this money you've worked so hard to get to
Right.
is a big first step, right?
Yes.
So but it's a real
Yeah.
privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna
It's a
correct-
different kind of donor conversation.
It is. Can I correct you just a little bit? I don't.
Yeah. You most certainly may. Go ahead.
Well, I just would. Our investment has not actually changed over the course of this campaign.
Oh, I was thinking for like previous campaign.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our actual
Yeah.
budget is roughly the same size as it was 6.5 years ago. So we did not have the normal, whatever normal was, in other places, but we did not have a, big investment for staffing and personnel. That's all been created by reorganization and taking advantage of departures to redeploy funds in different ways. So
Yeah.
it's been a bit of a 3-card Monte trick to make it all.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, because that is an important thing. I think sometimes when folks hear a big number like $750 million, they're thinking that you have a lot of money to work with. And, as you pointed out, relative to benchmarks, relative to peers, you're doing this on a slimmed down budget, and there are choices to be made. And,
Right.
We are having conversations right now about, if in the next campaign, the aspirations are again, ambitious compared to this, which was a big leap for Drexel. What would need to be done differently? And as you know, it's my point of view that just working harder or more creatively is not going to do it. So that I am an advocate for that for you all.
Well, I appreciate that, but it is clear that we will need, in order to scale to meet the university's aspirations going forward, we'll have to figure out a way to make an investment in advancement and other places. Well, I'm not alone in that, but
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. Well, David, thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation, and what you and your team have accomplished at Drexel over the course of this campaign is truly impressive, and is having a profound impact on the university. So I hope you all feel very proud of that. So thank you to David, to the GG&A team that produces these webinars, and to all of you for listening. Again, if you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A button. I also invite all of you to connect with me, with David, and with GG&A via LinkedIn. And if you want to talk to somebody at GG&A about any of the issues we surfaced here in this webinar, please reach out to us. David, thank you again. It was always a pleasure to speak with you.
thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate your counsel, and I want to say thank you to all my colleagues who actually did all of the work that we talked about. Kudos to them.
It's a pretty hardworking team at Drexel, so yes. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Suzanne. Take care.
everyone.